If you can't do this one habit for the next 30 years of your life, it's too restrictive.
Doing small steps every day over a long period of time, like a marathon, rather than 15 days and I'm going to completely reset my gut.
A gut reset isn't as easy as like drinking 5 teas a day for, a whole month. Welcome to Genestra Brands Gut Check, a 6-episode series where we teach you everything you need to know about understanding your gut health. In a world of health fads, quick fixes, and information overload, we want to simplify, educate, and empower Canadians about the vital role of gut health and overall wellness. In partnership with 2 renowned healthcare practitioners, Bisleen Attli, Naturopathic Doctor, Clinical Director, and TEDx Speaker, and Carley Nadine McConkey, Holistic Nutritionist, this series aims to dispel the myths and complexities surrounding gut health, offering reliable and scientifically backed information. Follow us on Instagram at Genestra Brands CA for more. Now let's dive in.
Gluten is very individual. What works for one person might not work for another. So for instance, some of my clients that experience gluten sensitivity or have celiac or perhaps have an autoimmune condition or thyroid issues, I would maybe recommend that they don't have gluten. With that being said, there's a lot of people that can enjoy gluten, good quality things that have gluten in it. There's not necessarily as much bad food than there is bad ingredients, or maybe not as supportive ingredients. So for instance, if you have a sprouted, really great quality sourdough bread, that is easily digestible. Yes, it has gluten in it, but I would much recommend someone having that than over like a processed gluten-free bread that is found, in the store with over like 20 ingredients.
Yeah, and I love that you highlighted it's the quality of the ingredients that matters so much.
Absolutely. So I think rather than just vilifying things as good or bad, I think it's really important to look at the individual. And the thing is when we get so caught up on being so restrictive and cutting out complete food groups, then this can lead to things like not having a diverse diet, which we both know is so crucial when it comes to gut health. And the restrictiveness can actually lead to nutrient deficiencies as well, which really doesn't serve us.
Yep, 100%. And you know what? I always tell my patients, like, if you can't do this one habit for the next 30 years of your life, it's too restrictive.
Absolutely.
And you need to think about how you can make it be more flexible so that you can actually, stick with this long term. And if you're ever thinking about if, you should cut out gluten, best thing for you to do is to talk to a practitioner before you completely cut out a food group and demonize it, because that could potentially have adverse effects and cause you to have nutrient deficiencies. I wish it was that easy, but it isn't. So I'm all for a good reset, a good cleanse, because I really do think it can benefit your gut when you give your gut a break from all the processed foods, the junk and the stuff that you are eating. But at the end of the day, like if you're gonna do a reset, you're gonna put in that work for a month, 2 months, 3 months, but then go right back to eating how you were eating before, and you haven't actually changed any of the underlying causes and factors that led you to even want to have a reset and cleanse in the first place, then you're gonna end up right back in the same spot. And so as much as that next cleanse, that next diet is just like, oh my God, this could be it, it's just so important to remember that yes, you could have a temporary benefit from it, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, how did I get myself into this place? And what are some of the long-term lifestyle strategies that I really need to implement and think about so that I can keep a good, healthy gut long-term?
Absolutely. And I think that there definitely is a time and a place for specific detox protocols, specific diets. And I think working with a practitioner, that's where it can be incredibly beneficial, so that you're just not guessing and doing all of these random, elimination diets and being incredibly restrictive.
A gut reset isn't as easy as like, drinking 5 teas a day for, a whole month. Usually whenever I do a gut reset with my patients, I'm getting them to do some sort of stool test so that we can get a good analysis of how their gut's functioning, what's the bacteria that's growing, not growing, how is the integrity of their gut health and lining. And oftentimes, before I even start a gut reset with my patients, we kind of have to flush things out of their system before we can repopulate, kill. And so it's really not as easy as just doing a juice cleanse or a tea cleanse. And it's so important, as you said, to talk to a healthcare practitioner so that you can get the right protocol and set up for yourself to get the best results.
So with this one, probiotics can still be very beneficial, and I think I definitely recommend to my clients having fermented foods is really, really important. However, having prebiotics, which is essentially fiber, this really helps populate that probiotics that we get. So they're both very, very important to have. And I like to think of the analogy like a garden, right? So we want to, have the flowers in the garden, but having that prebiotics essentially is like watering and feeding that garden so that it can expand and grow and we can take care of that garden.
And I think it's so important too that you reach out to a practitioner to talk about what probiotic is so good for you instead of just randomly going on the shelf and just getting one, right? Like Genestra, there's an HMF neurocognition line, there's a specific line for women's conditions, a specific line for IBS, and that's because there are specific strains in that bacteria that can specifically support those conditions. And I would also caution to people, be mindful of taking prebiotics, because I feel like people take prebiotics, but then sometimes they can actually make you feel worse because prebiotics don't go into your gut and they're like, oh, good bacteria, let me feed you. Oh, bad bacteria, you can't have me, right? They go and feed everything in your gut.
Absolutely,
right?
And this can cause a lot of digestive upset.
Yes, because a lot of us don't have a good diversity of bacteria. So if you are taking a lot of prebiotics or eating a lot of prebiotic foods, it just feeds everything in your gut. And if you have more of the bad bacteria, it can actually make you feel worse. So it's important to be cautious. This is why you should work with a practitioner.
I think we touched on this before, but it's not just about digestion. Everything in the body is so connected. Hormones, mental health, skin health, weight, everything is just so incredibly connected, so it's never just about digestion.
And a big thing that people don't really get is that so much of inflammation in the body can actually stem from our gut. So your gut is essentially, and your gut cells are lined together with like these tight junctions, so that's what holds the cells together. And what can happen over time is that if you have a lot of stress in your life, or if you're eating a lot of processed foods that irritate that gut lining, these tight junctions can actually start to like separate, and spaces can start to form between these cells in your gut lining. And what ends up happening is that then these pathogens that weren't allowed before end up going through, and this really triggers your immune system to start this whole inflammatory cascade all throughout your body. So inflammation is such a big thing that leads to so many conditions, and oftentimes it starts right from the gut because our gut and immune system are just so closely linked together. Yeah, so that is not true.
No.
And fiber is also one of those little fun words too, right? And I think people don't actually understand fiber either, and that there are different types of fiber. And if you take too much of especially the wrong fiber, it can actually do worse in your gut than actually make things be better. So when it comes to fiber, there's two main fibers that we look at. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So soluble fiber, it's soluble, so this means that it actually kind of mixes in well with water and forms like a gel-like consistency. So when someone has loose stools or diarrhea, that's more of the fiber that we look at giving them. And then on the other side, you have insoluble fiber, and that's the fiber, and what this does in your gut is that it draws more water to it. And so because it draws more water to it, it actually allows your bowel movements to push through. So that's more of like the psyllium husk, the flax seeds, and things like that that we see. So very important that if you're thinking about fiber, you get the right type of fiber, and this is where like talking to a healthcare practitioner really helps with all this stuff, because it really can make things be worse for you. And if you do take a lot of insoluble fiber, the one that kind of draws water from your gut, and if you don't drink enough water with it, it will definitely make you feel way worse.
But I love that you said that as well. It's one of those misconceptions that a lot of people think like more fiber, more plant foods, more like, all the fiber. But with a lot of people too, if we already have inflammation, like you were saying earlier about inflammation in the gut, if we already have inflammation and we're putting in the fiber, it can almost be like sandpaper. You know what I mean? Like it really can cause just more digestive upset. So that's where I think it's really, really important to pay attention to, how we're preparing food. And maybe you're someone that at this point in time, fiber is not going to be very supportive. So again, really, really important to work with a practitioner, and fiber is not always the answer.
If you are going to choose to eat processed foods, you're not going to feel the best afterwards. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your body or something's wrong with you. It's just, this is just how this food is going to affect us and impact us. Yeah. And having a healthy gut doesn't mean that you won't ever have issues with your gut. So I think it's really important to reset your standards and expectations of what you're trying to achieve. It doesn't have to be like a 10 out of 10 perfection, no symptoms. You know, if you're like 8 to 9 out of 10, like you're doing pretty great.
Absolutely. And I think everyone is constantly changing, and I think that's really, really important to note that health isn't linear, and it's always going to be this up and down, depending on where we're at in our life, our stress levels, so on and so forth. So, you know, someone might be able to tolerate something, you know, at one point in their life, and then another point they're like, I used to be able to eat this and I was fine, and now, you know, it's causing all these issues.
So there's a number of different things that can really affect our gut and our gut lining.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it all. A really big one are antibiotics.
Yeah.
And so antibiotics and what they stand for is like antibiotic is antibacteria essentially. And so what they do in our gut is they just go and kill everything in our gut. But it's so important that with antibiotics that you are replenishing your gut with specific gut bacteria. So when it comes to my patients taking antibiotics, I'll usually recommend a higher dose probiotic. So this is where I turn to usually the Genestra HMF intensive line because they are a higher dose. And then I'll always get my patients to take them about 4 to 6 hours away from their antibiotics, because if you take probiotics too close to it, it kind of defeats the purpose. But so this way, if you combine the antibiotics with the probiotics, you really save your gut long term, and you don't have some of those side effects that antibiotics can really bring.
Yeah, so dehydration is a huge one when it comes to clients that I have when it comes to constipation in particular. Making sure they're getting enough water is the number one thing that I talk about. And so making sure that they're getting good quality water, but also I think an important thing to say too about hydration in general is it's not always about the amount of water that you're having, but the quality. And so making sure that it's actually, you know, mineral rich water is really, really important. It actually hydrates the cells, hydrates on a cellular level. So sometimes I recommend adding a little bit of sea salt or adding a little bit of minerals to their water, and high quality water is really, really important.
Yeah, so stress, and I mean, we can all experience this too. When we feel really stressed out, like we tend to feel heavier, our belly can bloat up, and we're just really disconnected from our mind. And our gut and brain are totally connected together. A big thing that stress also does is that it reduces the mucus production of your gut lining, so it can really make it difficult to kind of basically push poo along. And you can end up in states where you are feeling really constipated and really full because your body's not excreting some of those things that it needs to excrete.
Absolutely, and it can also decrease hydrochloric acid, which is like the stomach acid that we need to break down our food, but also to kill any sort of pathogens or things that are coming to our body. And with stress, that definitely can decrease that, which, you know, can really lead to a lot of issues. And the next is the importance of fiber. As we mentioned before, fiber is so incredibly important, but you can get fiber through a lot of our whole foods. So like our fruits and our vegetables, packed with fiber, both soluble and insoluble. So yeah, fiber is also really, really important. So I say like water and fiber, really important. When it comes to digestion, excessive alcohol consumption is a big problem. It's, you know, when we have alcohol, it definitely affects inflammation in the gut. It can lead to, you know, that permeability, which we talked about, which is the leaky gut. It can definitely lead to that. It also can lead to stress and mental health issues, as well as blood sugar. It's so massive. So I'd say that excessive alcohol consumption is a big problem when it comes to gut health.
Totally. Yeah. And you know, for a lot of people, they won't drink during the week, and they'll think that, you know, I can just go get blackout on the weekend and everything is fine. But it's just like you kind of just undid all the work that you were doing before. Poor sleep is another really big one. I think a lot of us underestimate the effect and impact of sleep, especially on our gut. When it comes to poor sleep, just one bad night of sleep increases inflammation in our body. It also affects our blood sugar regulation. It affects our microbiota. And when we don't get enough sleep, it also increases our stress the next day.
I agree. It's one of the major pillars when it comes to health. And instead of looking at the next supplement that's going to increase your energy, I'd say looking at sleep. That's the magic pill right there. Well, we live in a world now where a lot of people are sedentary in their worlds. And so it's so incredibly important, not only for motility, so making sure that we're having regular bowel movements, but mental health and digestion just overall.
Yeah, and movement is such a great way to like actually move things in your body.
Exactly.
Usually I recommend, after you have a meal, go on like a 10 to 15 minute walk after, because it's great for blood sugar regulation, and it really just supports healthy digestion in your body, and really one of the best things that we can do.
Absolutely, and I think folks really underestimate the power of a morning walk or an evening walk. Like you said, going for an evening walk after dinner with, maybe by yourself or maybe with a loved one, it's just a really incredible way to regulate blood sugar after you eat. It's a great way to set your circadian rhythm. If you're seeing that sunset, you're going to have a better sleep, you're going to have better digestion. So it's such a simple and easy hack for you to be able to incorporate for digestion and overall health.
No, all probiotics are not created equal, and this is why it's so important that you do work with a healthcare practitioner so that you can find the right probiotic for you. Different strains of bacteria have been shown to be beneficial for different illnesses, and so when I have a patient come in front of me and we look at their symptoms, and based on their symptoms, I will look at a probiotic that has those specific strains that can support them. And it's not even just the strains, but it's even the dose. Right? So depending on what condition you have or where you are, you might need higher strains of bacteria or lower strains, and so all of these things can make a big difference. Is that it?
Absolutely, and the strains as well is really, really important, whether that be Lactobacillus acidophilus, whether that be Bifidobacterium. There's so many different strains that are really important for different symptoms and conditions. So it's important to work with a practitioner and find out the right one for you, and making sure you're getting a quality one so that you're actually getting the strains that say that they're in the probiotic.
I really think that probiotics is one of those supplements I recommend to kind of take all the time, because our gut bacteria is affected by everything. And even when we look at probiotics and fermented foods and things like that, we need to be consistently replenishing our gut. So even probiotics, when we take them, they really only, stay in our gut for about a week or two, and then they get flushed out, and then we need to continuously replenish them. So making sure you're having that kind of fresh, good supply of probiotics
Absolutely.
becomes very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I usually recommend to work with a practitioner. With my patients, I always get them to do some sort of stool test so that we can get a really good visual representation of what's happening in their gut, because as much as possible, if you can get the proper testing, talk to a healthcare practitioner who has a bit more of an expertise in this area, can be really helpful so that you can get those right strains of probiotics that are going to really support your gut.
Absolutely, and luckily Genestra also has a line that really does target certain things. So for instance, they have one for IBS, one for kids. So that's a very self-explanatory kind of way to be able to choose what works for you. But I think working with a practitioner is always best.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that the world that we live in, environmental factors, lots of heavily pesticide sprayed foods, unfortunately, quality of soil, as well as living in a very stressful kind of environment and world. So I think that leaky gut is incredibly common. So what I love about Genestra is it's clinically studied and research backed. So a lot of the recommendations that are on the label is a really great way to just be able to kind of go by that. I really love the Women's Daily probiotic, because not only does it have a lot of strains that are really supportive for women's guts, but also for vaginal health. It also has cranberry extract too, which can be really, really helpful for urinary tract infections. But I love it as well because it is shelf stable and it doesn't necessarily need to be kept in the fridge. A lot of the products from Genestra are just such good quality that you can generally just read the label and it's the recommendations are spot on.
Totally,
Yeah.
and the other ones, so this is the Women's Daily, they also have one for IBS, for neurocognition, others specific for vaginal health, for metabolic health. And then a second place I would also look at are these CFUs. This is called colony forming units, and this tells you how much bacteria is in the probiotic essentially. And a big misconception too is that, we look at a number like 100 billion, like, oh my God, that's gonna be so much better than 25 billion,
Yeah.
but that's also also not necessarily the case. More isn't always better.
Yeah, which is hard to get out of that mindset.
It really is hard to get out of the mindset. And sometimes more can actually make you feel worse too. So very important to note, you can have a bit of an adverse effect if you take too high of a dose that your body doesn't necessarily need.
Would you take this one for a shorter period of time, or would you do it for like a longer period of time?
Yeah, so usually the HMF intensive line is something that I either combine with a gut reset, so my patients will take it for about a month or two.
Yeah.
And with that one, I'm using an even higher dose than 25 billion. Or this is also a great one to use with antibiotics as well, because those antibiotics are really just killing everything in your gut. So to have something that's a bit more of a higher potency can really support you during that time.
I love that, and that's what I like about the women's daily, because it says daily, but it has 17 billion colony-forming units.
Yeah.
So it's something that could be taken more consistently over a longer period of time, which is nice.